So, Star Trek Discovery is is in full swing on TV or Netflix or CBS, All Access or wherever you're watching it. And I thought I'd take the opportunity to look back on the franchise and discuss the best of Star Trek. And joining me today is actually my older brother, Ross Coleman.
Hi there.
Hi there, Ross. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through different sections. We're going to talk about the best TV show, what we think is the best Star Trek TV show, and then best movie. And we have differing opinions, and we're just going to open up a discussion about Star Trek in general. So if we get started, Ross, I'll ask you first. What is your favourite, or what do you consider the best Star Trek TV show?
So, to me, the absolute best and undeniable best is going to be The Next Generation, by far. Unrelenting.
Yeah, I expected you to say that. And I think you already know what mine is. Mine is Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, yours is Deep Space Nine.
And you have some opinions about Deep Space Nine, don't you, Ross?
I do. Okay, so for me, Star Trek, like, both of us were brought up on Star Trek. So to me, Next Generation isn't just like a show. It's all the ideals and all, like, the epitome of, like, humanity's, judgment and just how far they can go. Like, just how you follow Jean-Luc Picard and what he can do for diplomacy and how he maintains himself, his composure. Do you know what I mean? I just find that is what Star Trek is. And anything where Sisko just ends up going up and crying in a corner about someone didn't give him a photon torpedo or something, or I don't know. It's just like, come on, man. How are you in Starfleet? You know what I mean? It's just like, to me, that is it. I would agree that perhaps Deep Space Nine is in many ways the superior series, but to me, Next Generation is like the best show, if you know what I mean. I think it's just, that's the dream, and then Deep Space Nine got really exciting and really interesting, but it kind of took away from my, like, image of it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I know you're not alone in thinking that. I think the Next Generation is great, of course. I mean, as I say, we grew up watching that show, and I just love it. It's a brilliant show. For me, Deep Space Nine takes the cake because, as you say, TNG is the ultimate ideal, and it's this utopia kind of future, and everyone's great, and the Federation is this kind of beacon of light in the galaxy, and Deep Space Nine sometimes conflicts with that. And I actually find conflicting with that quite interesting. And I guess people are in two minds of this sort of thing. It's one of the reasons I'm actually kind of liking Discovery so far as well, is that Next Gen and the original series always had this assumption that the Federation was always in the right, and that the Federation was always correct. And the kind of a formula for a lot of episodes is they rock up to a planet and they find an alien culture which has some regressive policy, which is an allegory to something that we do in society today. And then the Federation shows them the better path. Whereas DS9, and I think Discovery as well, do something which is quite fascinating, which is that the Federation may not always be right, or that they have a totally respectable viewpoint, but it may not always be applicable to the current situation. And what I find quite fascinating about Deep Space Nine is that it can be very, very morally grey. And as you say, because Captain Sisko is basically anti-Captain Picard, because Captain Picard is always measured, and he says, this is what a Starfleet officer should be, and this is how we should treat each other, and this is, the principles of the Federation. Whereas Captain Sisko, as you say, going off crying in the corner because he can't get a torpedo. He can be very volatile, and in fact, there's an entire compilation on YouTube of just called, it's 4 minutes long, just called Captain Sisko losing his temper. It's hilarious.
Mad,
And also, Avery Brooks has a funny way of delivering his lines. I think he does a really good performance overall. But I mean, people talk about the way Shatner kind of delivers his lines, but Avery Brooks has a funny way of speaking sometimes. Yeah. Because he's got this kind of taking a breath between every word.
Just kind of look there and stand there like, is this real, or they actually took this on the tape?
Yeah. Well, it's funny.
I agree. TNG is very kind of right and wrong. It's kind of black and white. It does dip into greys a little bit, but I think Deep Space Nine is shades of grey all the time, which does work to its advantage. Because I was thinking, if, say, Captain Picard was in command of Deep Space Nine and looking over the Dominion War and all that kind of such, it would be an extremely different story in many cases.
Yeah. And I mean, because I quite like... Because Deep Space Nine overall, I think, is just darker in tone to TNG, and because it deals with a lot of quite serious themes really head on. Because I remember I was quite surprised when, back in the day when we were collecting videotapes of Star Trek, and And
I still do.
You still do? Wow.
Yeah, I still do.
But I remember when we came across a Deep Space Nine video, because that was the time when it was in volumes. It was like, here's 4 episodes on one video, and then you have to collect like 10 more videos for the entire season. And we came across one which had the certificate 15, so it was R-rated.
Yeah, and I was like, what the fuck? It was I
was quite surprised, because that was the one, I think that's because it included the episode Hard Time, which is that really good episode where O'Brien is like, given that, he's like sentenced to prison, but in his memory, like he's given the memories that he was in prison for like 10 years, and then he gets out, and so even though it didn't really happen, he's still heavily traumatized by this experience, and he almost ends up killing himself by the end of the episode, and it's like, oof.
Yeah, that was actually quite a... Deep Space Nine has some absolutely amazing episodes in it. It really does. Yeah.
Because I mean, my approach is... there was a really good thing that Nicholas Meyer, the director of Wrath of Khan, said, and this is kind of my criticism when... This is getting off topic a little bit, but when people bring up, I see people bring this up a lot, when they bring up this quote from J.J. Abrams about the new Star Trek films, where he said, he was never a fan of Star Trek when he was younger, and he was always more into Star Wars, and he just didn't get Star Trek. And people always use that as evidence of like, see, he should never have touched Star Trek because he wasn't a fan. And I always think, well, if you look at Nicholas Meyer, he said pretty much the exact same thing, where before directing what many consider to be the best Star Trek movie, he had no idea what Star Trek was, and he watched the episodes and so on and so forth, but he kind of said, I think he said something along the lines of, and I'm probably slightly misquoting, but he said, what I brought to Star Trek was a healthy disrespect. And he said, it's all kind of moral allegory in space. And he said, I wanted more of kind of a swashbuckling adventure. And he's like, I wouldn't insist that, I think he said, like, did Star Trek have to be so sanctified all the time? Like it's untouchable and you can't change it, and you kind of, I think it's great that people can love something and admire something like Star Trek as a franchise or Star Wars or whatever, but I think if you're too afraid to challenge any of it, then you'd make something which is good, but not that interesting, if you know what I mean.
It'd just be the same thing, same story over and over.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, again, one of the reasons I really like Discovery, because a lot of people complaining about that, saying that doesn't feel like Star Trek shows of the past. And I'm like, well, it's not trying to be Star Trek shows of the past. That's the point. Star Trek always changes. And with respect to TNG...
On you go.
No, you go ahead.
So what I've seen of Discovery so far, I do think it was a bit more true to like the Star Trek idea, especially with the captain of first ship, I forget her name now.
Philippa Georgiou.
But like she was she was like very much Starfleet principles and things like that, and even some of the crew and things you can see they are very much grounded in that. So I think it is doing a bit of more of a clash of like the new idea, like the J.J. Abrams style, with like the old fanboy traditional vision of it.
Yeah.
Which I'm hoping to see will keep going.
Go ahead.
Yeah. On you go. Your turn.
All right. Yes, because that's what. So what I quite like is so you had the original series, and that was very much what set the trend, and then TNG came back and rebooted it, and it was pretty much doing the same kind of series, just with different characters and with a different overall style to it. And then Deep Space Nine comes along, and it's quite strikingly different, even from the first episode, because what I like is that it's a crew made up of different factions and different races, that it's kind of half Bajoran and half Federation, with a little bit of, there's Ferengi about, and there's all these other people.
It's very diverse.
Very, very different ideals that always clash. And because I think that was something that there was a remit from Gene Roddenberry on the the Next Generation for the first 2 seasons that he worked on, where he said he actually gave the mandate that no characters can actually conflict with each other. Which, if there's a great documentary on Netflix called Chaos on the Bridge, and they talk about kind of the troubles of the production of the first 2 seasons of Next Gen, which were just insane. And a lot of the writers that were being interviewed are like, Gene Roddenberry had some great ideas, but the mandate that no character can ever conflict with another character is really strange, because that's how you write good drama. And when you're given that limitation, it's very, very difficult. And I get what he means, and for a lot of the time in TNG, it's true, because they're all Federation and because they're all on the flagship of the Enterprise, and there's not a whole lot of arguing or debating or kind of clashing between characters. But again, what I like about Deep Space Nine is that you have the Federation, who are a moneyless society, who are pretty much socialist, very not capitalists, and yet one of the main characters is a Ferengi, someone who is massively capitalist, and the way they conflict with each other is really interesting. And you have Odo, who's the security chief, but he really does his own thing, and the first officer is considered a terrorist by another major faction of the galaxy, and just this kind of clashing of characters I think is really, really interesting, and the clashing of ideologies is really, really interesting. And again, this thing of the Federation may not always be right. You can see where the Federation's coming from, and it's totally an ideal to strive for. But at the same time, it may not always be the best course of action. And that's what I find really fascinating in a lot of the themes and the stories brought up in Deep Space Nine.
Can I just say, I absolutely hated Deep Space Nine from the very first episode.
Yeah?
And here's the reason why. Okay, I get very emotional with my characters, and that moment when Sisko is talking to Picard in the briefing room, okay, and he just looks at him and goes, "I was there at 359," and Picard just subtly looks away, and I'm like, "No, you crushed him!" Like I was like outraged and crying for Picard so much. Like
it is really,
like, Sisko, you're dead.
It's so uncomfortable, that scene. Because it's like,
no, it's very good though.
Yeah, you want them to like meet and be like, oh, it's the 2 Star Trek shows getting along fine, and then Sisko just really doesn't get on with Picard, and it's like, oh.
I think that was a very clever move for the series, though. Very, very clever.
Yeah, because even towards the end when they meet up again, and he's like, I would appreciate if you not say that I want to leave this post. He's like, well, I don't know if I can. And it's this like, they leave on better terms, but not really good terms. And that's it. Yeah. So it is kind of jarring to watch, because I think that it started in season 6 of TNG. So after 5 years of Picard being such a great character and one that the audience really, really likes, to see the new captain, or the commander at the time, come and basically just clash with him and not like him and not get on well with him is quite jarring and quite.
Hurts feelings.
Yeah, it hurts your feelings. Yeah, but that's something. Speaking of characters, something I do love about Deep Space Nine, and there, you can debate about this, is that I personally think that as an ensemble cast, they're stronger than most other Star Trek shows. Because what's kind of paradoxical for me about Deep Space Nine is that it doesn't have my favorite captain. It doesn't have my favorite science officer or security officer or engineer or anything, that kind of stuff. Because, for example, my favorite science officer is Spock, and favorite first officer is probably Spock as well, and we'll get into favorite captains later. But in a weird way, I think that the cast of Deep Space Nine, or the way the character interactions are written on Deep Space Nine, are written better than a lot of other shows. Like, in a lot of other shows, there's always kind of that one character, or those 2 characters, which are pretty disposable. Or if there's an episode about that character, no one really likes that much.
Yeah.
For example, in TOS, you had Kirk, Spock, and McCoy as the central trio, the really good, solid central trio. But the rest of them kind of get the shaft a lot of the time, or fall by the wayside. Like, Scotty has some funny lines, Sulu and Uhura get stuff to do, and Chekhov gets stuff to do now and again, but they really don't
as much.
Yeah, they don't have significant arcs, and all the good material is given to Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And in fact, Sulu didn't even have a first name until I think the 5th movie. You never actually hear anyone call him Hikaru Sulu until like movie 5, I think. So it's kind of, shows how they got the shaft. And I think Uhura her first name is mentioned in the original series, or no, I think it was they mentioned her first name in the original series and then changed it later on to Nyota. And then in TNG, again, full of great characters, Data, Picard, Riker is great. But then at the same time, Beverly Crusher, she's competent, but she doesn't do a whole lot. And Deanna Troi is just, my opinions of Deanna Troi are pretty clear. My review of TNG is she's just useless.
Yeah.
Because, I sense considerable deception coming from them, Captain. It's like, oh, really? It's always so obvious what she says. And there's just a few other characters in other characters here and there in TNG which are just a bit, I don't really care when it's their episode. And in Voyager, Voyager and Enterprise, I think, are personally the worst offenders for that. Because Voyager has great captain, 7 of 9 is a brilliant character, Chakotay's pretty good, I think Tom Paris is pretty good, but Harry Kim is a bit meh, B'Elanna Torres is a bit meh, and Neelix is, you either love him or you hate him. Well, having said that, I think he's just meh as well. And in Enterprise, I honestly think there's only like 1 or 2 characters that are really, really good. The others are just kind of fine.
I think
but not
I would agree
extraordinary.
with Enterprise being I did not actually give a shit about anyone except for the engineer and the Vulcan lady. I completely blanked there. Everyone's name. Yeah, T'Pol. Everyone's name in Star Trek. Like the captain, I did not even I just didn't care.
Yeah.
I don't know. It wasn't interesting. He was just like, we're humanity's hope. We're going to show everyone what humanity is, and he's just like, cool. What else, mate? I don't know. I just couldn't get around him.
Yeah, Enterprise has lots of problems, yeah. But so for me, considering that, there's always like that one character who's not that interesting, whereas with Deep Space Nine, I find that of the main cast, you can literally pair anyone with anyone else, and you get an interesting reaction. Like in my review of Deep Space Nine, I said I didn't really like Dr. Bashir that much, and I don't really. He gets interesting stuff later on in the series with his whole genetic engineering thing, and but personally, it's more down to Alexander Siddig's performance just kind of irked me the wrong way. But whenever Bashir is teamed up with O'Brien, they're like a double act. And it's great, and they have good material to work with, and they clash in interesting ways. Like there's that great episode, Hippocratic Oath, where they get captured by a squad of Jem'Hadar that are trying to break their addiction to Ketracel White. And O'Brien is like, yeah, fine, fuck them, just let them die. And then Bashir says, no, I've got a Hippocratic Oath, I need to save them. So that's always interesting. Then there's another episode where Quark and Odo are paired together, and of course they hate each other, and that's an interesting reaction. And Sisko and Dax are an interesting pairing as well. So like there's every time you can basically jumble the characters about in any combination, and you get an interesting dynamic out of that. Not to mention because Deep Space Nine is got a fixed point of the station, you get all those brilliant recurring characters that are always coming through, and they're always interesting, like Garrick, who's just a brilliant character, brilliant performance from Andrew Robinson, and Gul Dukat, as far as I'm concerned, is the best villain in all of Star Trek.
The villain, I will give him that.
Yeah, he's absolutely fantastic. And there's tons and tons of great recurring characters that come in and interact with people. And again, what I like in Deep Space Nine is, because it starts toying with that overarching story thing, there's real consequences to people's actions. And it's one of the reasons, again, I love TNG, but TNG, Voyager, and TOS, and to a degree Enterprise in the first season, have that tendency to do the reset button thing, where after all the problems of that episode are solved, the next episode it's like, and back to default setting. Whereas in Deep Space Nine, that's not really what happens. Because as I said, Odo and Quark, so like Odo and Quark hate each other, but there's a really good episode, I can't remember what it's called, where they get stranded on a planet, and they have to climb this mountain to set off a distress beacon.
Because Odo was taking Quark to prison or whatever, or to trial at the start of it.
Yeah, something like that. And but then by the episodes following that, you can actually tell that they've got a mutual respect for each other.
Yeah, like, the actions change and stuff. The way they interact is different.
Yeah, and I really, really like that. And you can tell, because again, Sisko does some shady shit. He does some really bad stuff.
The dodgiest captain, like even comparable to Kirk, like in the dodgy does. He's just like, well, I'm going to bomb one of your colonies with poison gas. And he does it. He does it.
I know. Because I always think, when I was watching that episode the first time, when he's hunting Eddington, who's joined the Marquis, again, which I just think is a brilliant arc, because Eddington's whole position is, he's always like, the Federation's worse than the Borg, because you don't even consider that you're wrong, or you don't even consider that anyone else wouldn't want to join the Federation. And that whole arc where, the bit where he says, Dax, lock a torpedo to hit this colony and disperse all this poison gas and render the planet uninhabitable for the next 100 years. And when he does it, and I was sitting there thinking, and now he says, good fakery there, Dax. We really had him going. He doesn't do it. He's like, no, I just bombed a colony, and it's like, oh, okay. And again,
that episode when he assassinates the Romulan person or whatever
in the pale moonlight, which is brilliant again. Where, because that's the whole bit where he's like doing a confession to his log, and at the end of it, he's like, I've lied, I've cheated, I've bribed, I'm complicit in murder, and it's all worked out in the end. And he's like, can I live with it? Yes, I actually can live with it. And he's like, computer, delete that log. And it's so chilling. So he's really not a good guy in a lot of ways, Captain Sisko is it. But again, that's kind of what I find fascinating. Like, the first episode where Captain Sisko meets Q, and he punches him in the face. And he says, Picard never punched me. And he's like, I'm not Picard. This is a really interesting dynamic. And I think because of that, because it has these really fascinating themes, has really cool character interactions, and of course, superficially, it's just got tons and tons of great space battles. For me, that just puts it over the top of TNG. Even though TNG is a great show, for me, Deep Space Nine takes the cake.
I don't know. I can never say I like any other series more than TNG. To me, it is just like my upbringing. It's my religion almost.
Yeah. TNG. Because a friend of mine has been steadily working her way through Star Trek, and it's like every time she finishes a new episode, she messages me about like a new character she loves. She's completely head over heels in love with Data, and at first she hated Picard.
Who cannot love Data?
You cannot hate Data at all. It's like, and at first she didn't like Picard, and then after a while he opens up and you discover, and she's like, oh, okay, I like Picard now. And there's tons of great stories in TNG. There really, really is. But like I said, there's also the odd episode which is all about Deanna Troi, and I just don't give a shit and I fall asleep. And there's that weird episode where Beverly Crusher bangs a ghost.
Yeah. I'm sure there's weird as fucking shit episodes in every season.
That one especially, I'm just baffled by, because they even adapted it from like this ghost story or something. I just don't understand.
It's just like, why would you make that Star Trek?
Yeah.
That did not need to be Star Trek.
And that one's also directed by Jonathan Frakes. It's directed by Riker. And I'm like, mate, on the whole he does good stuff, but man, he dropped the ball on that one. I guess that I don't really know who could make that script good, but yeah.
Can I go off on a little tangent here?
Yes, of course.
Okay, this would be, I don't know if it's weird or whatever, but can I make the case for Deanna Troi?
Oh, if you want.
Okay, so I think the idea behind Deanna Troi was solid, okay? Ignoring like the telepathy and all that, but you know how usually each character is like a telepathy or whatever. You know what I mean? You know how like in the original series, it was a big thing to have Uhura and to have Sulu and things like that, and they're always trying to do something new and like kind of update it. I think the idea behind Deanna Troi was obviously she was a woman that sat right next to the captain. Although she didn't like hold any official position on the bridge or whatever, she was the central staff. She was right there in the command deck, even though she was practically a civilian.
Yeah.
Which I thought kind of interesting. But the also thing I thought that was trying to show, but I don't think it quite worked in TNG, was the fact that she was supposed to be like a psychologist.
Yeah, counselor.
That all this like thing about going to a shrink or like having to talk to someone about your feelings or whatever is even now still very taboo.
Oh yeah.
Do you know what I mean? because I was thinking about this for a little while now, that I think she was like a strive forward in that direction. Because if you think, if you think that people with like post-traumatic stress, or even just like depression stuff, like there was an episode where I think she loses her telepathic ability temporarily because some two-dimensional creatures or whatever. And she was counselling this woman that had lost her husband and such like that. So it was like grief counselling and stuff. So I think the idea of Deanna Troi was to make that more visible to the public and make that like something in the future people still do talk about their feelings, and it is a normal thing to do.
Yeah, I guess so. I never quite considered that. Yeah. But
other than that, I kind of think she is very, the telepathy thing was never really used for anything interesting, except the odd episode like Eyes in the Dark and
This is such a good episode, though. Yeah, because I remember Marina Sirtis, the actress who played her, has said in interviews or something like that, where she said in the first episode she had a proper uniform and she actually seemed intelligent, and then after the pilot episode they gave her the bodysuit and things to show her boobs essentially, and then when she was in that suit she had no intelligence and had no brains, and then later on, I think it was in season 6 or season 7, where she got a uniform again, and then from there on she's like, and then Deanna Troi became smart again.
Yeah.
And I think possibly true, and for me it does rub me the wrong way a lot of the time when her only job is to say stuff which is just completely useless and redundant. And I just think it's, as you say, it is a solid idea, and I just think it's wasted potential, really. Yeah. I always think in terms of the actual counselling, I thought Guinan did a better job of that than anyone, because Guinan was kind of the people that, oftentimes Picard or Data went to, and they said, Guinan, I'm having a problem, and then Guinan would give, that really cool Elorian wisdom that only Whoopi Goldberg can deliver, and just fix it all up. And so
if Guinan was on the bridge, it would be it just become the ultimate badass show, because she would Jean-Luc, go shoot those Romulans or whatever, or she'd be constantly just chilling with him in the ready room, just drinking tea or whatever, having shits and gigs, and she's a badass with a finger as well. So if anyone boarded onto the bridge, they'd be she'd cut them in half in a second and everything,
Yeah.
She would be the ultimate badass on the bridge. It would just be amazing.
Because she also does, because she's got that massive gun behind the bar that she breaks up a fight with one. And also that time where Q shows up in the episode where they meet the Borg, Q Who.
Yeah.
And as soon as she sees him, she does this weird martial art pose.
She's got some powers or something. She can tell
and
them to fuck off things.
It's what was she gonna do? This was kind of fascinating about her as a character, and the whole Elorians in general, is that you don't know that much about them, but they just know some stuff. Yeah,
I'd really like to see Elorians again, actually.
Yeah.
I'd really like to see them come back through into Star Trek.
Yeah. They're a really interesting species, just because you need to know more about them. Yeah. Anyway, so, for me, Deep Space Nine is the best show because it takes the established themes and the principles of Star Trek as a franchise and does really interesting, ambiguous, morally grey things with them. It's got great character interactions, really great writing and development for each character, which is able to carry over because it's more serialized, and of course tons of great space battles. And that's why it's my favorite and why I think it's the best personally. Would you like to make a final case for TNG?
I can't disagree with anything you said in Deep Space Nine. I still think Deep Space Nine is the superior series, but Next Gen is the better show for me. It's just everything that you should strive for. It's very clear of what humanity could be. It's very much a continuation of the original series, but cheesed down and then built up with some truly excellent episodes. Yeah. And you can't, and it's just that's what humanity could be. It's what we should strive for and everything. That it's almost becoming the vision of a personal mission for me, or for what we could become.
Totally. Yeah. So it's for the comments to decide, I guess. So next is the best Star Trek movie, and I messaged you before to talk about this, that everyone always says Wrath of Khan. So we decided to not say Wrath of Khan, because everyone chooses Wrath of Khan. Wrath of Khan has been done to death. Everyone knows why it's good. You know, it's great themes. You know, it's the great performance from Markova.
Nothing more needs to be said.
Yeah, nothing more needs to be said. If you want to know why Wrath of Khan is so great, just search it up on any other video. You know, there's just tons and tons of material out there about why Wrath of Khan is so good. So, apart from Wrath of Khan, Ross, what is your favourite Star Trek movie?
To be honest, I always think I would always go with a Kirk era movie rather than a Picard. I don't know what it is. I'm not saying the next gen movies are bad in any way. Obviously, some are, but I don't know. There's just something about the Kirk movies that just feel and have a better tone, and it just feels great. So I think after Wrath of Khan, I would probably go for Undiscovered Country.
Undiscovered Country is really good, yeah, because that's the other one that's directed by Nicholas Meyer, the director of Wrath of Khan. And I do really like Undiscovered Country. Some people really don't like Undiscovered Country, I've heard. Like, a lot of people are like, no, this is not really. I don't really know why, to be honest, because I think Undiscovered Country is great. It's got a really unique but iconic musical score. I really like the music for Undiscovered Country.
I will never forget that music.
Yeah.
Like, we'd watch it over and over again just for the music.
Yeah, it's just got that really slow kind of build, and it gives great music to the Klingon battle cruisers as well. It's just, it's a very slick production. It's very, Nicholas Meyer has a very trademark cinematic eye to it all. It's a very interesting thematically as well, because it was also paralleling the fall of the USSR at the time, and it's just got an amazing space battle at the end, like one of the most amazing. Like, it's such a thrilling scene where they're being attacked by the Klingon bird of prey that can fire when cloaked. It is a really good movie, and it does get you at the end when they're told like the Enterprise is to be decommissioned, and they're just like, nah, go fuck yourself.
They just fly off. They're like, we'll just go for a drive.
Yeah. So it is a really good movie. I'm probably going to say something which I know is going to be controversial, because all of my videos when I did my Star Trek marathon, a lot of the times when I'm talking about the prime timeline stuff, there's people who are like, I disagree, but blah, 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 blah. As soon as I talked about the Kelvin timeline movies and I said, oh, I really like them, the amount of people in the comments that are just like, no, you're wrong, it's bad. Ugh. I'm gonna pick, personally my favorite Star Trek movie kind of changes all the time, but right now I'm gonna pick Star Trek Beyond as my favorite. And I'll tell the reason why is because something about the movies which kind of struck me is that a lot of the movies actually don't carry on the tradition of the shows, if you know what I mean. So like, after the Kirk era movies, it's like everyone's like kind of in their 50s and they've done their 5-year mission to explore deep space, and they're kind of trying to recapture their glory days. Like the whole 2, 3, and 4 is all about Kirk. You know, it's like he's an admiral, but then he doesn't want to be an admiral. He wants to command the starship again, and he gets out there into trouble and ends up being demoted at the end. And it's kind of, they always start those movies like, oh, I'm doing something which is not exploring space, and then something always like pulls them out of that to get to a ship again. And it's like, there's always this feeling that their best days are behind them in a way. And it's kind of similar to TNG in that they don't do a whole lot of exploration, and they don't actually get out there and visit that many new worlds. You know, it's like Generations is all within the Federation, and they know where, what was it called? Viridian 3 is. And First Contact is on Earth. Great movie, but all on Earth. Insurrection, again, it's all in Federation space, which is why the Baku should just jump ship in that movie as far as I'm concerned, because I hate them. And Nemesis is all in the Romulan borders and all that kind of area, whereas Star Trek Beyond, in fact, even the first 2 reboot movies are like that, in that, you know, they go to, you know, Star Trek 2009 is basically they go to Vulcan and back, and then Into Darkness is they go to Klingon and back, or Kronos and back, or the edge of Klingon space, whereas Star Trek Beyond is one of the only movies, aside from, funnily enough, Star Trek 5, where they actually go somewhere that's like new and unexplored, and because they see that really amazing Yorktown space station, and because that is like the epitome of as people say, Gene Roddenberry's vision of like, here's all these different cultures, all these different aliens kind of coming together to build this amazing thing and live in this amazing utopia-looking place. And the visual effects used to illustrate that station are just incredible. But then at the same time, they go off through that really cool nebula, which, you know, they're like dodging rocks and all that kind of stuff, and then they confront those really interesting ships, and they find that new planet, and they meet all these new alien species, and it feels like they're going out into deep space on an adventure. And I think that surprisingly, a lot of the movies don't actually capture that. And Star Trek Beyond is actually one of the few movies where they truly do boldly go to strange new worlds and meet strange new life. Also, it's just a great adventure, it's full of great action, and it's got some really nice meta-narratives. It pays a lot of tribute to Leonard Nimoy and Anton Yelchin as well. I just think Star Trek Beyond is great. Thoughts?
Well, my thoughts towards the J.J. Abrams, or like the Kelvin timeline. You know my thoughts on this.
Yeah.
I am very much in line with the majority of the Trek fans in that.
I wouldn't say the majority of Trek fans.
Sorry?
I wouldn't say the majority of Trek fans. I don't know what that split is,
like
but I don't know.
The big outspoken fellas,
Yeah,
or like
the
the big,
vocal-
you know,
that vocal part.
Yeah. I cannot deny that they are good movies. That they are really good movies. All of them. I did really enjoy them, but to me, they're not Star Trek. They just can't be Star Trek. And then I'm just, well, you know, I'm a very, very nitpicky person.
I know you're a nitpicky person.
Just very things in it I just can't stand. It's like the phasers on the ship are literally disco lights. Like the models, like the physical model in the animation is literally a disco light that just spins and shines and stuff, and it's just like, no. And then I don't know. There's just lots of little things in it. I do really enjoy it, and I actually quite enjoyed like the way they play around with like Spock and Uhura and stuff like that. I think, you know, I do enjoy them, and I'll watch them again. But to me, it's just not Star Trek. I can't include it.
I always think, I always think it irks me slightly when people say that it's not Star Trek, because it is. My philosophy is always like, and I mentioned this in my Discovery video, in that Star Trek is such a multifaceted franchise. It kind of goes everywhere, where people are like, that's not Star Trek. And I say, yeah, but Star Trek has done everything. Like Star Trek had an episode. Yeah, Star Trek has done an episode where Beverly Crusher bangs a ghost. The Voyager has done an episode where Voyager's done an episode where they go to the Q Continuum and fight a recreation of the American Civil War. Next Generation has done Robin Hood. Like, they've done everything. So to say like that's off limits as that's not Star Trek, I think is just kind of unfair. My philosophy was always like, it may not be the Star Trek that people prefer, but it is Star Trek. And I think that it's true when I was first watching the 2009 one, when that opening scene happens and the USS Kelvin's getting like pounded by Nero's ship. And at first I was thinking in the back of my mind like, the phasers aren't beams. And they're actual turrets on the saucer section. And are the shields up? I don't know. And then as soon as those thoughts started creeping forward, I wasn't enjoying the movie, and then I decided to wall that section of my mind off. And I'd be like, hang on, no, stop. It's like, stop focusing on the tiny thing. Because as far as I'm concerned, it is nitpicky, and it is tiny things that overall don't affect the movie as a whole. And I just think, you know, the phasers are different, yeah. Phasers have been changing constantly. Like in the original series, phasers were blue, and then they changed to I think they were blue anyway. Well, we're both colorblind, so they could be, you know, whatever color. But
I think they were blue. They were blue something.
They were blue at some point. And I also remember but again, it's difficult to tell because I think they changed what the phasers look like for the remastered editions of the original series, where they put those new effects in. Yeah, because I think it changes even in the original series, like episode to episode, and the way shields look has always changed as well. Like the original series and Kirk's movies have like shields, but you can't really see them because somehow in Undiscovered Country there's a bit where they punch a torpedo through the saucer section while the shields are up, which is odd. And then in by the time you get to TNG, it's like the shields are there sometimes, but not really. And sometimes in TNG, they fire phasers out of the struts to hold the nacelles up, which is kind of bizarre. And then
there are strips on there, though. Like,
are there?
Yeah. Remember we had the Star Trek big file things?
Yeah, the fact file.
And it showed you blueprints of like all the ships. There are strips on like just the curve of the strut.
Oh, okay. But yeah, and then like so by the time that's kind of inconsistent through TNG, and then by the time you get to like DS9 Voyager, the shields are the bubble. But then in Nemesis it changes to like a hull tight around the hull kind of shield again.
Yeah, it just changes. I think for the movies it's kind of like whatever looks the best, or what looks the most interesting.
Yeah, and the way warp speed changes all the time as well. So like for me, it's true that those details are there, and you can nitpick them because a lot of people are like, you know, if it started with the USS Kelvin, then it shouldn't look that way, and it should look like this, and you know. But then other people say like, well, it caused ripples in the timeline, so it added to all these changes. And personally, I just don't really care. I've just decided not to care about that stuff because overall, what I care about is story, character, theme. And I think for all three of those movies, I think that's actually quite strong. Into Darkness is the weakest one out of that kind of trilogy of Kelvin Talman movies. And for me, Beyond is the best out of those three because it's just so... as well as communicating a healthy theme and doing really good things with the characters. Like, I think that's when Chris Pine really comes into his own as Captain Kirk. Because before they were kind of leading on he's the wacky playboy kind of thing, and that worked when he was like just fresh out of the academy. But then by the time you get to Star Trek Beyond, he's really coming to his own as like, this is the Captain Kirk we saw in the original series, where he's actually mature and he's kind of the Horatio Hornblower type, where what happens to his crew and his mission bears heavily on him as a person. And I find that quite fascinating. And I just think, at the same time, it's just a very fun movie. And I don't understand the people, because I know when the trailers were coming out and they saw, when the first trailer happened, it was sabotaged by the Beastie Boys in the trailer, and you saw Kirk doing like a motocross jump on the motorbike. And some people have a huge problem with that. And I always think, is Star Trek not allowed to do that? Like, because I mean, Star Trek had Magic Carpet Ride by Steppenwolf in First Contact. You know, when he's blasting off, and because that's a great song, and it's like that's a classic rock song, and you know, by the time you get to the 23rd century, as Spock says in Star Trek Beyond, he says, "Yes, I believe it is classical music." So it's like it would work, and it's a good song as well. And I just think people kind of hold Star Trek up to this standard, which it doesn't always meet a lot of the time, because like sometimes it's great and sometimes it's heavily philosophical. Like some of the best episodes are just people standing around talking in a boardroom. But if you're going to drop $150 million on a movie, I want to see some action. You know, if it's worth seeing on the big screen, I want to be excited and be thrilled and have an adventure. If you know what I mean.
It's just the nature of a movie being a lot more vulnerable to scrutiny like that, because if you can take a series as a whole, where there will be stupid, completely dumb episodes in there, you know, like shagging a ghost, or I don't know, like going back in time and playing Civil War with folk and stuff. It's just, but you can't take a movie as like as in the same way as a series, because it is a standalone thing, whereas a series is like, you know, like 20 hours of content.
Yeah, 20-something episodes every season, yeah. But yeah, because that's always what I find is one of the reasons I think Star Trek movies are quite hit and miss with the fandom in general, is that the series is allowed to bounce around and have episodes which are, you know, there's a wibbly-wobbly swirly thing attacking the ship. What do? Oh, we do some technobabble thing and it fixes it. And then they go like to Picard being with his family and being sad, and then you go to a space battle thing, and then you go to standing in a courtroom and doing a thing, and so you can kind of jump around back and forth in a series. So if people really like the philosophical side of Star Trek, that's what they'll remember from the shows, and if they don't see it in the movie, they won't like it. Whereas if people really want some space battles and stuff, and they remember those from the shows, and they remember the action from the shows, and they don't see that in the movie, then they're going to be disappointed. So it's actually very, very difficult to please all Star Trek fans when it comes to the movies. And
I think it also depends on the way a series is laid out, because remember how you were talking a minute ago about how Deep Space Nine has like a huge overarching episodes where you need to watch them in order, whereas Next Gen has all the standalone episodes and things. I think I'd actually really like to see that come back again, because TNG was able to do that really well. Like it did like a whole, like you said, it does whole episodes on like, oh, this culture is a bit biased in that way, and has like, oh, the females are the dominant ones, or like a court case and things. But I think that allowed them to like truly explore really interesting things. Like the court case for Data, is he a being or whatever, and things. I'd really like to see that in a new series, because it's just that there's nothing like that anymore, really.
Yeah, it's difficult to kind of reconcile the two, and it's also because like just the TV landscape has changed quite a lot, and the movie landscape has changed quite a lot. So again, because Star Trek being as old as it is, it's very difficult to reconcile everything the franchise has been with everywhere it could possibly go, and if that'll fit into what's contemporary with the movies, or if it should do something different. And it's very hard to balance all of this, and it's why I think it leads to a lot of kind of sections of the Trek fandom being really angry and hating a certain something which another part of the fandom really likes. And because I really do like the new Kelvin Timeline movies, because to me it's like that's Star Trek finally given the budget that it needs, because it's always, aside from before the Kelvin Timeline movies, the motion picture was the only Star Trek movie which was actually given like a, at the time, blockbuster budget and made like big blockbuster monies kind of thing. And it's okay. And Kelvin Timeline comes along and it's like, okay, here's Star Trek, but it's like, it's bigger and it's cleaner and it's like more slick. And I also think something which is kind of jarring to a lot of people, and was jarring to me as well, is just that the directorial style of Star Trek changes massively between the Prime Timeline and the Kelvin Timeline. Yeah. And also why I think a lot of people aren't liking Discovery as well more than anything is because if you look at Star Trek shows and movies of the past, movies of the past, a lot of the movies have been done by TV directors. Not to say that they're bad, but on a TV schedule you don't have time to set up a lot of interesting camera moves and a lot of you don't have time to give it a lot of visual flair, and obviously at the time technology just wasn't up to the task of accomplishing what a lot of people wanted to put on screen at the time.
It just doesn't have the experience or the knowledge for it.
Yeah, whereas now it's caught up, and you can more easily put big scale like action and so on and so forth on the screen, on the big and the small screen, and people expect a lot more visual interest from their movies in terms of filmmaking. So like it's like if you look at First Contact and Insurrection and Nemesis and things like that, the direction is good and it's fine and it's cinematic and they get some great set pieces out of that. But then as soon as you jump to J.J. Abrams, it's like, here's lens flares, here's handheld cam, here's whip pans, here's tracking shots, here's all this kind of stuff, and it gets quite jarring, and it's like, whoa, you've never seen Star Trek be this kind of, it can almost seem chaotic if you watch them back to back. The difference in the filmmaking style is just so, it's just more in your face in a way. And some people don't like that. Personally, I think it totally works. And for me, Star Trek Beyond is just what the original series would do if it was given $180 million, which it was. And that's why I think Star Trek Beyond is, at present, my favorite Star Trek movie, and what I consider the best one, because it kind of captures that bright, colourful future and bright, colourful adventure, but just on a much bigger budget and on a much bigger screen, and that's why I kind of have it as my favourite. Yeah, but you were talking about Undiscovered Country. Is there anything else you want to say about that? Because I don't know. I see a lot of people admire it, but I don't think just Undiscovered Country gets talked about as much.
I don't understand why not. I think as an episode, it is almost like an episode in many ways. Do you know what I mean? Like, obviously there is like the huge political situation of the Klingons coming over, which is itself a very Star Trek ideal to me. I think that's what makes it a very Star Trek-y thing. But of course, it does have extremely good battles in it and really interesting. It has towards the beginning where the D7's in 0G and stuff, just the cinematic style of that
Oh,
Like
yeah.
I still even get goosebumps with those phasers and things whenever I see them.
Oh, yeah.
Or like the Klingon getting shot in Zero G and just going floating around, going. Oh,
And having
I don't know.
is it purple blood?
Something like that.
Again, I think the color of Klingon blood changes all the time as well.
And even if it did, we probably wouldn't have been noticed.
We probably didn't tell either. Yeah.
We're kind of screwed that way.
Like, is it pink? Is it? Yeah. Because I remember one time we were adjusting the settings on our TV and we turned everyone green and didn't notice.
We didn't notice. or it's like, I don't know if it's the same to you, but to me, fake tan, like spray on fake tan, is green.
Yeah.
To me, like
it's
it's
green.
the same color as grass. Like
Yeah.
I go to my mates like, why is that person green? And they're like, what?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh look, someone's doing Kermit impression or something, or someone's dressed as Kermit.
They look like the Orions from Star Trek. That's what
They
it
do.
really.
They just look. Sorry.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's any other colourblind people watch this get the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see.
That's a tangent, yeah. It's funny, I just talked about how I like Beyond for being bright and colourful, and I probably haven't only seeing like 70% of it. But.
Completely different colour to everyone else.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So Undiscovered Country, yeah, I think is like probably the perfect swan song for the Kirk era, because as I said, it even though I just kind of complained that a lot of the Kirk era movies are actually, that thing of our best days are behind us, but I feel like Undiscovered Country somehow captures that in a really poignant way, and it uses the ending of hostilities between the Federation and the Klingons as like the bookmark for that's where the Kirk era ends, because the big bad guys of Kirk's era were the Klingons, and then ending that war is a really nice meta-narrative. Well, not only is it an allegory for the USSR breaking up, but it's also a good meta-narrative for, Kirk's war is over in a way. Yeah, and at the same time, I think everyone just gets their wee moment to shine. I mean, Sulu, of course, is captain of the Excelsior by that point, and a lot of people have been wanting. Yeah, a lot of people have been wanting to see like Captain Sulu as a show, or I know there's a lot of books I think of Captain Sulu as well, and Chekhov has the bit where he's going through suspects and he bring the boot to a suspect and goes, "If the shoe fits." And then they realise that he's got like 8 toes or whatever, And Uhura gets the bit where she has to translate Klingon on the fly without the universal translator.
Mm-hmm.
And Spock, Kirk, and McCoy are, again, just that great central trio that are all doing their thing. So I think it's a really nice movie. It's a really... Yeah, it's a really setting send-off. Can't even speak. It's a really fitting send-off for that... for that crew, and it is a great movie, and Wrath of Khan is a great movie as well. Yeah, for me personally, like the best Star Trek movies in general are Wrath of Khan, Undiscovered Country, First Contact, 2009, and Beyond. I think are if you want the best of the best Star Trek movies, that's them.
I would probably have gone to the motion picture after Undiscovered Country.
Yeah, you really like the motion picture, don't you?
Yeah. I think I watched it. Well, when did it come out?
It came out in 1979, 2 years after Star Wars.
Yeah, because I remember. I think I was watching that like almost before you were born, kind of thing, or like
Probably.
when you would have been a baby and things, and like. I don't know, it's very engraved in me. And see, like, there are certain scenes that are just, like, haunt me, like the transport accident scene.
Oh yeah.
Where God damn it, I am so fucking shit scared of that scene every now and again. It gets me every time.
I mean, that movie has a lot of nostalgic appeal for, I think, both of us, because of that really brilliant, it's called a blaster bar, that instrument that they used to make that sound for V'ger. I can't do it, but
it's just brilliant.
Everyone knows that sound for V'ger, and it's really cool. I mean, I really like it I really liked it as a kid. It has a kind of nostalgic place for me, but it is so slow. It takes about like 40 minutes for them to actually get out of space dock, and I just think Kirk is a bit of an arsehole throughout of it, and it feels just a bit flat and a bit stale to me, that whole movie. Visually amazing, but just a bit emotionally not that investing. So that was myself and my brother's opinion on our favourite Star Trek movies and TV shows. Hope you enjoyed it. Do you agree, disagree? Tell us in the comments below. Have a good one, guys, and as always, live long and prosper.
See you there, guys.